Hey everyone, I'm Diraj Goel, founder of Get Fresh Ventures, where we help founders from early stage to growth stage and small and medium enterprise in bringing concepts of high growth venture startups and AI enabled growth to their organizations. This is the Growth by Design podcast, where we go into the worlds of entrepreneurs, from those building from 0 to 10, 10 to 50, and 50 to 200, and how they made the leap into entrepreneurship and redesigned their lives around a new version of success. Today, I'm joined by Shawn Johnston, CEO and founder of Refoundry. Shawn spent over a decade building and running a digital agency, living the margin pressure, the delivery drag, and the talent constraints that most agencies accept as normal. Instead of scaling headcount, he saw an opportunity and he rebuilt the operating systems for agencies. Refoundry now helps agencies deliver projects up to 70% faster with way more margins using a low code infrastructure and AI accelerated workflows. Shawn is the epitome of the mid career professional. It's someone who's had a version of his professional life where he saw an opportunity with the new AI capabilities that are available to redesign his life and the lives of the agencies that he supports. Shawn, before we get into how you got here with Refoundry,
Yeah.
why don't you give us the short version of your journey and how you got here and brought Refoundry to bear?
Yeah. So the whole web part of my career started maybe 16 or 17 years ago, and just started with a freelance hustle that sort of turned into an agency. And the fact is, I built a really bad agency for the first 5 or 6 years. And when that kind of collapsed, I sort of had a period of time where I went back to basics and put myself in a production role. We sort of like got down to just producing really good work. But in that time, that's when I started to realize that there were patterns in what we did and systems that I could leverage. And so those early days is when I started to systemize what we were offering, mostly just to make my life easier so I could produce more. But over time, that became ideas around how to remove the wheel building portion of what we do so that for every project, we're not redoing the same work. That turned into 4 or 5 different attempts at different implementations. And I realized at the time that the traditional workflows were the problem, the technologies were the problem. So there was a few technologies that sort of emerged around the time. Webflow got popular, Figma was blowing up, and WordPress's Gutenberg backend had released a bunch of new features that finally took it from an experimental CMS into something that I could actually use at a agency level. And so that's when the idea for Refoundry formed, is could we take a low code or no code approach that feels like a design app and enshrine that inside or leverage the Gutenberg framework to do that within WordPress. So yeah, we started building out Refoundry, I think 5 years ago, launched it internally 3 years ago, built about 150 projects on it at this point, and then launched it for other agencies to leverage a year ago. So yeah, that's the short version.
Congratulations. With the founders I work with, most of them come from a services background, whether they're working in a company or running a services agency. Sometimes it's a fractional person, sometimes they're running a human-based agency that are providing services. And inevitably, through desire for scale and margin, they build tool sets or leverage tool sets. Some of those evolve into operating systems, which
Mhm.
then become products. And it very much sounds like that's been the journey for you. You built the Refoundry primarily to serve your team and your organization and your motivations, but that's in itself translated into a product that now you're working with and serving the other agency. Tell me a little bit about the motivations that got you to systemize this, and then also how that's translating with the agency owners that you're working with now.
Yeah, I think my fundamental driving force is that I'm actually pretty lazy and I hate doing work twice. And so the idea, well, I'm not actually lazy. Being able to boil things into repeatable processes just make them easier to do. And I really, really hate having to do work multiple times. So at the fundamental basis, like that's what drove that. But also it was like, there's always a bit of curiosity, like, is there a better way to do this? I've never been very complacent with taking established norms and just saying that's how work works. So it was, yeah, just a constant need to iterate and improve and facilitate and carry forward and evolve how we're doing the work that we're doing, and just not being satisfied with the norm. When I'm working with other agencies, a lot of those conversations really revolve around going after mid-size or smaller projects that are not financially possible for them with their traditional build models. A lot of them are really feeling the pinch with resource bottlenecks because there's not as much margin. They have to run on leaner teams, which means a smaller development team, which means having everything have to move through developers just creates more of a bottleneck than it used to. And that really constrains their ability to move quickly and adapt. What's also happening, particularly with AI, is that our customers' expectations are increasingly becoming more about adaptability and evolution and less about control and gatekeeping. So traditional models just make that impossible. So a lot of the conversations have an early adoption is really helping them align their internal systems to train up their teams in how to conceptualize the work they do from a low code and systems-based mindset so that they can take advantage of the systems, because it isn't just a build tool. That's definitely the core product, but it's a methodology for delivering the work, and that requires some change management and understanding and buy-in.
When I was building companies, I had a certain skill. I didn't realize until a couple of years ago that it was driven by my ADHD. And what I also learned physiologically and psychologically why that happens. And you say it lazy. I consider myself lazy for a lot of my life. But we don't get any dopamine from the things that everyone gets. That little small little hit of dopamine because they brushed their teeth, they did the dishes, they did the same task over again, they sent the same email. It's that repetitive, slightly different,
It's
doesn't
so
require a lot of cognitive load.
Yep.
It's driving from to your work the 20th time. You don't even really have to think about where you're driving.
Yeah.
We don't get any dopamine from that. And
No.
intrinsically, we don't want to do it. And we try to figure out how not to do it. And
Yep.
that's usually where the innovation comes from. It sounds very much like that was the motivation and the driver for you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was diagnosed with ADHD, I guess 10 years ago and autism 2.5, 3 years ago. And yeah, that was the thing. Like having to do the same thing repeatedly it was just very hard for me to do. So if I could use systems to do the work for me, then I could focus on the parts that I actually found interesting, which was
Yeah.
not the routine everyday stuff.
And AI has been such an unlock for that, right? Because it's helping to do the cognitive processing that you know how to do, but you don't necessarily want to do it because it's already been done before. I want to say this because when we get into technical conversations, you and I can get pretty technical and we can use all the jargon. For the sake of the audience,
Yeah.
but let's use this in simple terms, right?
Yeah.
An agency as a client has this expectation of time compression. I want something and then it's there. We're all kings and we need things and they get delivered to our home.
Yeah.
And that's a paradigm change in the last 10 years. What does that look like now with Refoundry?
Yeah, I mean, it shows up in a lot of different ways for myself, but it was using it for myself to unlock some velocity and ideations, just be able to get things out of my head and riff on it with something that could move sort of at the speed of my thoughts. And then, as I was doing that and learning how to use the tool to document ideas, expand concepts, implement systems, I saw an opportunity with the right framework to solve the second problem. So Refoundry, the product, sort of solved the development problem within digital agencies, the amount of time routine development takes and how much of that is repetitive from project to project. So the second piece that gets us in digital agencies is the content problem. So being able to take, with the individual clients, to take all of the content from a current website, refactor it, and move it into a new website. It's a very labor-intensive process. And so how that's playing a part in Refoundry is through this content intelligence layer that we're shipping right now called Wayfound. And so what that allows us to do is index any existing client website, give it a bunch of strategic guidelines and voice and tone guidance and keyword optimization pieces, regenerate the content within low fidelity prototypes to sort of support content strategy and UX designers' iterative work much faster. And then once it's in a good spot, you can export that directly into Refoundry, the product. So now you have a populated, assembled, prototype ready or development ready website experience within WordPress. So being able to start using AI to automate the movement of content and the regeneration and ideation creation of content. It's something it's very good at. And actually being able to have that content move through a build framework unlocks all kinds of velocity, iterative abilities, capacity for humans to focus on the strategic layer rather than the grunt work of just copy pasting content from one document to another.
And that's the drudgery of
Yeah.
technical work. And
Yeah. That's
in
right.
our layman term, we call it technical debt or a roadmap, right?
Yeah.
It's a list of all the things that you have to do. An agency owner in traditional sense has maybe, let's assume 10 members on the team.
Yep.
They've got a group of clients. What does their day look like in the pre-Refoundry world? Like a standard WordPress agency, how many developers, how are they working? A client calls and says, hey, I need this, and we're launching this campaign.
Yeah.
Can get it done. It's Monday morning,
Yeah.
and they didn't tell you anything, and you got to launch it by Tuesday night.
Yeah. So a typical agency will have a project manager of some kind, a content strategist slash copywriter, information architecture type person. You're going to have one or two UX UI designers, either combos or separate. You'll have some kind of like technical project manager or QA manager. And then the rest of it is developers, usually a team of like two or three. And so what that looks like is you've got your resources committed to your actual production work, your main projects. You're trying to drive your revenue through that. But then clients sort of come back with late stage changes or emergency things that have to happen. And so they'll receive the request that needs to get discussed internally, gets documented in tickets. That gets sent over to the developer who's going to have questions, and that back and forth happens. They implement something, they send the ticket back, someone's got to look at it and send it back. And there's this whole back and forth that has to happen because there's a translation problem between what the client's asking for and how it actually gets implemented from a development perspective. And so that whole process is really labor intensive and not driving a lot of revenue for you. So post Refoundry or really any low code implementation, but Refoundry was what we're talking about here, is it doesn't actually require the developer portion of that whole part of the back and forth can go away. Your actual designer or your QA manager, even the project manager, can implement those types of changes without needing to it because we're working within a low code framework. So a lot of times this looks like assembling a page for a landing page campaign, or, oh, we've got to update all our contact callouts, or we need this new section on this one page, or we have to adjust our buttons. And all of those things within a low code framework can just be implemented by non-developers at velocity. And because you mentioned technical debt, there is no technical debt. We're just dealing with scalable systems that have been assembled into the shape of this particular website. And so, that is the current reality for a lot of people or a lot of agencies, and where they lose a ton of their margin and a lot of their human capital, like being able to just the exhaustion of having to do everything the hard way really takes a toll on an agency's culture. And then what potentially moving to more scalable systems can unlock as far as like capacity and ability to move projects forwards and satisfy customers' needs in a timely fashion.
So, I mean, essentially, the agency owner, let's just say that they're the creative lead. And frankly, the creative lead can be not an agency owner that runs a web dev shop. It could be a PR lead, a marketing strategist. And arguably, you're saying this person doesn't need a dev team, doesn't need a designer, doesn't really need any of those functions, and they can act by themselves, be a solopreneur and use Refoundry
That's
to
right.
build
Yeah.
complex
Yeah, it
environments.
provides agency and autonomy to work with the client to create a solution because we're dealing with a defined box of Lego within a scalable system, right? So you don't actually need to know how to implement it; you just simply insert it because the system is intuitive. So yeah, we see that at an agency level at Forge and Smith all the time, where all of the support requests that come in from existing clients, which is a big part of our business, all had to funnel through a development team that we're trying to keep focused on producing new projects that derive the bulk of our revenue. And now 80% of that can actually just go through technical project managers, even content folk, where it's like, I can add a section, I can remove that button, I can update the banner, I can change that color, I can adjust that font size. All of that can happen without needing to go through any developers because it doesn't require any technical ability to implement.
There's this paradigm, right? Like AI is going to come and replace everything. There's the AI threat.
Yeah,
And then we heard very early on, AI is not coming for your job. It's someone using AI. I still have a strong impression that AI is just like mobile. Everyone's used to say, we're a mobile native or mobile ready 10, 15 years ago. It
that's
would be
right. Yeah.
absurd today.
Yeah.
I think it would be absurd to highlight AI in about 10 years because it would be
It's a tool.
domesticated.
Yeah,
Is a tool, but you still need humans to tell it what to do and how to do it and
that's
where
right.
where to go.
Yeah.
Where does that leave the developers, especially with the agencies that you are working with?
Yeah, I think that the most effective evolutions that I've seen. Okay, so like there's this idea that when you see it in platforms like Lovable, I'll just use that as an example, right? So we're replacing the need to know how to build a website with something that can generate it. The problem is that when you are reselling that as strategy to end customers, there's nuances to that. Like you can produce something that looks like a website, but if it doesn't work, then you're failing your customers. Being able to use these as tools to support the content strategists or the UX designers to iterate more quickly so they can focus on driving the strategic goals and requirements. So your specifications for AI to help with creating velocity or reducing labor is the most effective way to get there because it's still a cohesive, authentic, and specific implementation of strategy and need for that specific client. Clients are not derivative, right? Each one has their own story, their own set of needs, their own audience, their own business objectives. And so on the development side, when you're working within frameworks that require less code, then you have a system that AI can actually leverage. When you give AI too much complexity, it doesn't do it as well. It makes too many mistakes and you spend more time correcting the AI than it would have taken for you to just simply do the work. So if you work within a low code framework, then the technical lift is a lot lower. And then you can actually focus your time on vibe coding some sort of particular style piece or some JavaScript animations, or having like what we're doing with Refoundry, baking AI into the system itself so that it has a framework to work within. So our most successful experimentations with content has been not asking it to create its own components or its own design choices, but simply work with parts that provide the framework for it to do a very specific job, which is produce good content in a strategic way.
One of the arguments I have against letting AI run amok is consistency
Mhm.
and framework based approaches. Um, what would you say to an agency founder who's on WordPress today that they're concerned that Framer or one of these other low code, no codes, or a client saying, I'll just light up cursor and build my own website?
Mhm.
Where does WordPress fit in now in that new paradigm? And where does the no code platform for WordPress fit in that new paradigm?
Yeah. So I think this comes down to sort of business needs. Like a lot of the no code platforms like Webflow or Framer, they're really great from enabling designers to do things or build things, or even DIY business owners to do things without needing development, but they're not properly content management systems. So they work within a certain realm. But if you're dealing with like, a large corporation or a nonprofit organization, for example, that's got, 50 to 60 pages and a lot of content that needs to get produced and many people that need to do that work, you do require a proper content management system. So WordPress still is the Cadillac in that space. It's sort of the default that everybody is familiar with, and it still drives over 40% of the internet for a reason, because managing content through an AI is not the most comfortable way to do it. Sometimes you just want to click on text and change it because you don't have the time to kind of go through that prompting layer.
Hmm.
So, and there's some like practical realities, like WordPress from a search engine optimization standpoint and from an accessibility standpoint, in terms of how that drives your content marketing and your overall domain authority, is still a powerful tool. A lot of these derivative platforms aren't producing code that works that way. They can produce things that load quickly, but when we're dealing with the game of inches that is SEO, and every inch counts. Like it is a
Mhm.
trade-off, and that's for real. That's measurable. What we've managed to do with Refoundry as far as bringing the value portion, the low code implementation inside of the CMS experience of WordPress through its Gutenberg setup, is you can kind of get best of both worlds. So for the people that want to be able to ideate without needing the technical knowledge, they can do that inside of WordPress. But for the people that just need to manage content, they can also just do that within WordPress. It doesn't have to be either or.
So in the conversations that you're having with agents, what's been the pull that they've been expressing when you show them what they can do? And then also, what's the barriers that you're encountering for those who maybe struggle to understand
Yeah.
how they can implement the solution?
Yeah, there's a few pulls and opportunities they see right away. Like it's a competitive market. Project budgets are going down and expectations are always going up. And so with traditional implementation and its time intensiveness, like it's hard to make the emerging budgets work. So the first one is they see an opportunity to diversify their product offering, move into smaller or mid-sized projects, maybe provide a way for their design team to implement so that it doesn't have to go through a more expensive development team. So they see those opportunities. They also really feel the pull towards what we've talked about already is like having more people be able to move projects forward without having to move through the bottleneck, because that resourcing problem is real. And for frontline team members who have to deal with frustrated clients that don't understand why a small change takes 3 days to implement, this is a significant relief for them. It creates a lot of agency for them to simply make simple changes or even more complex changes on their own. So they do see all of those opportunities. The hurdles oftentimes is implementing what is a fairly comprehensive workflow change. Leveraging a low code or any kind of like build system benefits the most when every member of the team is working with the same understanding of what we're doing. So if your content strategy is framing around a UX system, and most every agency is working this way. But if that UX system is then aligned perfectly with your build system, but that build system can adapt with the design realities without becoming brittle, then that actually requires a certain amount of cross-team understanding. And so a lot of agencies are structured around this idea that strategy and design is thrown over a wall to development to implement. And when they're done, they throw it back over to get everything signed off by the client. So this requires, and this, well, not even requires, this enables a blending of those capabilities. And a lot of times developers will get really angsty that designers would be able to affect changes that would normally go through Git commits. Like, how do we track that? What do we do? So actually understanding how to internally determine who gets to do what and how that gets tracked in a way that makes everybody feel comfortable and empowered and excited rather than defensive and self-protective and frustrated is one of the primary hurdles. And that's like a bit of a cultural problem inside agencies that's not really a product fit issue.
But yeah, I mean, that's consistent in kind of any software development, right?
Yeah.
Or any corporation for that matter.
Yeah.
Left hand is not talking to the right hand.
Yeah.
It's endemic
Yeah.
to corporate.
Yeah, and
And this
we've found at the Forge and Smith agency side that we've always worked very, very hard just for cultural reasons, not to allow those silos to form. Everybody works together. We're all part of the
Mhm.
same team. We just have different skills to bring to the table. And that has been one of the largest hurdles is that is not universally true. Everybody is actually seemingly quite comfortable with siloing technical teams from strategic teams.
Exactly. So can a PR agency or a marketing agency or solopreneur leverage Refoundry? Is there a massive learning curve? Because there are technical elements still to it. If you were to build a full build pipeline, right? So with all the various components and the push to production and versioning and so on,
Mhm.
would someone who's running an agency actually decide to run Refoundry? Or is Refoundry built for that technical agency?
I think it's got a similar learning curve as a tool like Webflow. And so it depends on what your capacity for that learning curve is. There's no new skills in building with Refoundry. It's a 12-column grid. It's flex layouts. It's styling methodologies that we're all really familiar with. And so we're not implementing a UI layer that's fundamentally different conceptually than stuff
Mhm.
we're already working with. But with anything, there's a little bit of a learning curve. There's a pre-baked
Mhm.
component library that comes with it. It's very easy to adapt. The rules are fairly straightforward. There's realities around WordPress's full site editor features around like responsive previews and how templates work. But I really do feel like anyone can learn how to do this. Where you may need a little extra technical support will be where you need to write a little bit of CSS to customize stuff. But there is even an area inside WordPress's editor that you can just dump CSS for styling, and you could absolutely leverage a ChatGPT or a Claude Code to sort of write that for you. With a little effort and elbow grease, really anyone could learn how to build with a system like Refoundry.
I was remiss in mentioning you're Canadian and you're a Canadian founder.
That's right.
And, I'm Canadian as well. So I appreciate that we're building here in Canada.
Yeah.
There is a dearth of entrepreneurs in Canada, and also a big challenge around fundraising.
Uh-huh.
However, you've been able to build this product without raising any funds,
Right.
leveraging government funding and grants. And where I've struggled sometimes when working with founders is that becomes almost like a handicap where there's less of a focus on monetization, too much R&D, a product that gets built like a Ferrari but drives around the block.
Uh-huh.
Explain to me your journey. You've been exceptional, I think, at leveraging those opportunities that the government's given you, but you've in a not a common approach.
Yeah. So, I mean, originally the tax refund program actually became a way of trying to dig ourselves out of debt. I had managed to, just because I'm a designer by trade, I did not go to business school, made lots of choices I wish I could have changed in hindsight. But yeah, that was initially the approach. Was the very first one was really just like, can we take a bunch of the work that we're trying to create around systems, place it within a scientific argument and get a little bit of money back. And we were successful the first time. The first claim was 100,000. For me, that was like life changing. But I saw an opportunity. I was like, so you mean that if we continue to push more of our time into R&D, and if I can leverage that time to drive the service side of the business, like we could actually create a revolving door of funding. I just need to find a way to sort of get us through the year so that we can top back up again. And what emerged was a cyclical opportunity. So that meant that we sort of built up the R&D side and did that in a way that directly fueled the services that we offered so that the service side of the business actually became a test kitchen. So everything we were doing was being framed and fed back by real world needs, and the whole
Mhm.
team sort of worked together. But that allowed us to leverage most of our technical side as a shred refund strategy. And what we did is we just fueled parts of our capital expenses, so most of the engineering team, with short-term BDC loans. So we actually took advantage of the BDC and its sort of low entry, personally secured capital loans. And so what we would do is we would borrow the runway and then pay it off, and then borrow the runway and pay it off, and then use the surplus to reinvest back into R&D. And then taking advantage from there of the IRAP funding to be able to move with even more velocity. So the first prototype of Refoundry was built through our first IRAP project, and we're just wrapping up our third one. So the second two IRAP projects were around the AI piece and that augmentation. So yeah, between those three pieces, we've been able to bootstrap without manageable debt with this whole build process. And I think Refoundry plus Wayfound is sitting at like 20,000 hours, maybe a couple $1 million worth of R&D investment.
Congratulations.
Yeah, just by using the system in a strategic way to support itself.
It sounds like you can write a how-to guide on leveraging government funding the
Yeah,
right way.
yeah,
What would you say to an entrepreneur or one considering, especially coming from the services? And again, I find almost 90% of the folks I talk to who are at that early stage, usually coming from a practitioner background,
yeah.
and then productizing the opportunity that they see, that the ability to go from idea to a product to market has been significantly compressed. Pretty much anyone can do it, but what would you suggest to someone who's going down that road?
Yeah, I think we might have saved ourselves a little bit of time understanding what problem we were solving in a more articulated way. Like we knew what problem we were solving for us, but what we maybe didn't fully think about was how we might be different from the marketplace, or how we went about solving that might be different. So like really understanding, like your anecdotal experience is not necessarily going to translate to the market. So you have to
Hmm.
do that due diligence. I spent a lot of time unpacking my assumptions with actual data from the market. So yeah, just make sure that you're solving a broader problem than just yours. That's an important thing to consider. And then you have to, from there, understand what narrative is going to come out of that. Like, can you explain the
Hmm.
solution to that problem in a way that people will kind of give you, that will create some curiosity, that will be willing to give you their time? And is the benefits of your solution obvious? In the end, we built the right product, but it took us a while to figure out how to tell that story. And we might have built a better product faster if we had understood that story sooner.
So get in bed, so to speak, with
Yeah.
your customers.
Now we got a little bit lucky in that sense is that strategically we built it inside of an agency that was very busy. Like Fortune Smith is extremely efficient. We produce maybe 45 to 50 website projects a year, which is, 4 or 5 times more than a lot of agencies do. So we had an enormous amount of iterative improvement. So, we got away with it a little bit that way. Yeah, it's real world testing and stress testing so that you're working with actual friction and failure and feedback rather than a bunch of assumptions that work really great in the lab, but not out in the real world. You want to get into those situations as fast as possible. I just woke up one day and just said to everybody, okay, we're building with Refoundry now. And it was a nightmare for like 3 months. But that was that stress and pressure is what allowed us to really refine things and realize like where the actual gaps were in a real world sense and hustle to fill them. Because what is this? Somebody said to me, yeah, if you're not embarrassed to ship your product, you've waited too long at
I
that.
agree.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree. Great artists ship early.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you for a couple of blanks, actually, because we're almost out of
Yeah.
time. First, we've been working together for, I think, over a year,
Yep.
right? Yeah. I would love to hear untainted, unvarnished, the experience in the work that we've done. And then a meaningful plug for you to speak directly to agency owners that through this platform in words that are relatable so that they know where to find you, why to talk to you, and how quickly to be knocking on your door.
So first, experience with what I just talked about, right? Understanding the narrative, what problem you're solving, is that solution obvious in your product? Being able to work with you to refine that. I wish I had been able to do that earlier. It's a very natural tendency for founders and entrepreneurs or visionaries or whatever word you want to use to live in your head for a really long time and to do
Yeah.
things independently in your own echo chamber because we're, a little bit afraid of negative feedback, of people not agreeing with us, the friction that comes with that. But I think that when you work with a collaborator like you with the program that we work through, if that can happen in a safe collaborative environment, then it becomes a velocity creator, not a stress inducer. And I
Yeah.
think that that is a really necessary process, but being able to find someone that you can do that with is harder to do. So for me, like what started as I need someone to help me, actually became a genuine friendship. So like I wouldn't have reached this point without having that kind of collaboration. That was a real velocity creator, and it just got me out of my head and my own anxiety and into something that I could see in the real world.
I love diminishing anxiety
Yeah,
and increasing velocity. Those are the things that make me really happy.
yeah,
Uh, and, uh, and as much that I appreciate you as a good friend now for life.
yeah,
So you're never letting me go.
yeah. You're stuck with me.
Now,
Yeah,
talk to the agencies. Tell them why they should be talking to you and how quickly they
yeah.
should be knocking on your door.
Yeah, like just agency owner to agency owner, the current web process is fundamentally broken. We don't have to be producing work the way that we are. Agencies rely far too much on top down management, on sales first approaches, and just heroics. All of us have a couple of overachievers on our team that fill in the gaps that have to be there because we're just doing too much work with too few people because the market's requiring it. And the thing is there's a better way to do it. So much routine grunt work that just doesn't have to happen anymore, but we don't know how or afraid to or unable to work with our teams to get them to understand the problem and then work together to identify solutions to it, and do that in a way that accepts that we have to change the way that we work. And so I think Refoundry provides an opportunity for us to leverage repeatable, scalable systems within a known commodity, WordPress, which is easy for us to sell, that ties in or integrates directly into your existing workflow. You don't have to reinvent the way that you do the work. You just remove the pieces that just don't serve you anymore. And through that process, empower your entire team to solve problems that they have every single day. But until we let go of this idea that custom work requires custom code, then you're going to be at the mercy of your technical teams forever. And with AI continuing to push our customers' understanding of how fast things should be or how easy things should be, like we're hitting a crossroad. Like the current agency model is already failing. It's time to adopt new ways of doing the work and new technologies and just lead with some curiosity rather than fear.
Well, what I heard is that agency owners are working too much, overly stressed, highly anxious, not getting things done as quickly and having to answer customers in a way that doesn't actually feed their soul.
That's right.
This is not why I started the
Yeah.
company, and
Yeah.
it's not actually serving them.
Yeah.
And Refoundry is going to allow them time back, get back to the creative aspects.
Now, I'm not just pitching an idea. Like, we've lived this experience. We solved our delivery model. I've got a team that loves coming to work, loves working with this tool. They get to tell clients yes all the time. And I have developers that are doing the actual work I need them to, not firefighting stuff that we're not getting paid for. Like, this is lived experience. Like, help me help you. Just give me an opportunity to chat with you.
Happy staff, happy customers, get paid,
Yep,
money in the bank,
it's possible.
less work,
Yep,
less anxiety.
it's
Awesome.
possible.
I
Yeah.
love it. All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Growth by Design. That sounds like the best way to find growth.